Hey guys, I'm James Westhorpe, and in today's video we're going to be building on our last video of specificity of training, where we spoke about joint angles and joint range of motion in relation to training. And today we're going to be talking more about the velocity specific adaptations that we get to lifting. So first of all, we go back to the concept of the body is always adapting. And this is because, again, whatever task we do, our body is going to adapt to that. So people who Olympic weightlift get better at Olympic weightlifting because that's the task that they practice. Rowers get better at rowing because they practice rowing. So it's all specific to that task that they're doing. And velocity specific gains are no different when it comes to training. There's a saying, train fast, get fast. And if we take that for what it is, it's essentially saying that when we train, we want to try and lift that weight as fast as we can, no matter how much weight is on the bar, whether it's the hardest weight you've ever lifted or whether it's just the bar. You're still trying to exert maximum force into that bar and get it from A to B as quick as you can. So before we move on to talking about our velocity specific adaptations, I just want to rehash some basic physiology and give you an overview of motor units and muscle fibers and how they contribute to velocity. So if we talk about our motor units first, so these are basically the connection between our muscle fibers and our nervous system. So our nervous system is going to send that signal to the motor unit, which is then going to tell the muscle what to do. We have three types of motor units. So we got our type 1, our type 2A and our type 2X. So our type 1, the really slow contraction, like really long duration, they don't fatigue very fast. And then we have our type 2A and type 2X. Type 2A is going to be a little bit less fatigable than our type 2X, but it's not going to have as great a power production as that type 2X. So type 2A lies a little bit in between that type 1 and that type 2X motor unit. And then we have our muscle fibers, which are pretty much synonymous with our motor units. So our type 1 muscle fibers, they're going to be very sustaining energy contractions. They're going to have like low levels of carbohydrate usage, so they're going to rely on that fat to last as energy. They're going to not be able to produce as much force as our type 2A and X muscle fibers. And then as we look at that type 2A, it's lying in between the type 2X and type 1 muscle fiber. So a little bit less fatigable than that type 2X, and it's going to have a lot more power and force potential. And then again, type 2X is going to be a little bit higher than that. So ideally when we train, we would like to hit that type 2X muscle fiber for strength power, but we also seem to get adaptations towards that type 2A, but that's for another video. So going back to what we're talking about, we need intent to move the weight. So we have what's called a Henman size principle. Now the Henman size principle basically says that when we do a task, so if I'm going to do a bicep curl, for example, if I'm lifting a really light weight, I'm not going to recruit those type 2A and type 2X muscle fibers until later on in that movement. So if I do a really slow movement, it's going to just hit that type 1 motor unit and muscle fiber, and then as I progress, it's going to, and I fatigue more, I'm going to hit those larger motor units because I'm requiring greater amounts of force relative to as more reps I do. And on the contrary, if I'm hitting, say, a 1 rep max, straight away, I'm putting as much force as I can into that weight, and then I'm hitting those large motor units straight up because I'm requiring great amounts of force. So looking at the intent to move weight, so if I'm lifting a bar, let's say I'm squatting, I always want to have intent to lift that bar as fast as I can. So if I'm not doing that, I'm never going to be recruiting as many motor units and muscle fibers as I possibly can to get the greatest adaptation specific to that velocity. So whether I'm moving the weight slowly with like a high load, or I'm moving the weight really quickly with a low to moderate load, I still want to be lifting with intent to try and hit those type to muscle fibers, because that's what we really want to adapt when we're training strength power in the gym. So again, intent to lift the weight as fast as we can at all times. Now, intent to move the weight is a little bit different to the actual bar speed. So sometimes people think, oh, the speed of the bar is important. Whilst it is important, it's not as important as having the intent to move that bar as quick as we can, okay? Okay, so when we talk about moving the bar as fast as we can, there's going to be times where we do and don't want to do this. So let's have a quick chat about rehab. So sometimes when athletes get injured, we don't want them to be lifting with intent as hard as they can all the time, because let's say, for example, someone's just torn a hamstring. Lifting with intent and lifting as fast as we can is going to put extra stress through the joints that hamstring is connected to, and therefore that hamstring has to take a higher load, which it may not be ready for. So sometimes we just need to think about lifting with control and slow speeds to really work on feeling the muscle, letting some blood flow in there and letting it repair, rather than just lifting it as fast as we can. So that's just something to think about as well. So remember, there are times and places for everything, but when we're not injured, we always want to lift with intent and lift that bar as fast as we possibly can, because again, we don't want to leave any of our adaptation under the bar, so to speak. So for our next bit, I just want to talk about some applied lifting techniques that we can use for maximum velocity adaptation. So we have what's called the force velocity curve, which I've spoken about in the past. So we have our max force slow velocity lifts, and then we have our low force high velocity lifts. And basically what that means is it's a continuum of how much load to speed that we're going to use. Now, let's say we have bands and chains attached to the bar. Now the concept here is that whenever we lift, we're going to decelerate as we're coming back up with that bar, because we're not projecting into free space. And now if we say attach some bands to the bar is then going to have to be further accelerated as we get out with it. So as we come down, say on a bench press with the bar, the bands are going to loosen, so the load becomes less. But as we push that bar back up, when we're getting towards our end range, we become a little bit stronger, but those bands start to kick in and get more tense. So as we're pushing up, we have to keep accelerating to get that bar locked out. So that's just one way to really train the velocity side of it under heavier loads. And then we have also velocity-based training, which is where we can hook up a linear positions transducer, as it's also called or known. These are things like push bands that you can attach to your forearm or the bar. We also have a gym aware, which is probably the gold standard at the moment, where we have like the unit on a little string that attaches to the bar, and it measures the speed, velocity, height. Like there's a bunch of measurements that you can get from it. This is another way to track velocity of the bar and really understand how much intent someone's putting in. If you have the baseline numbers of what their maxes are, you can really get a good prediction of where they should be at for each load. And the other thing I want to talk about in terms of velocity-specific adaptations are things like ballistics and plyometric training. So ballistic is something as simple as just getting under a bar and just jumping with it as high as you can. Things like Olympic weightlifting derivatives, so you might be doing power cleans or hang clean high pulls, jump shrugs, anything along those lines. That's really going to give you a good velocity adaptation as well, because you're projecting into free space with the bar and putting as much force into the ground as you possibly can. And the other one's are plyometrics, where we're training that stretch shorten cycle, where we're just jumping off the ground, minimal ground contact time, and really working on the ability to preload and stretch those tendons and put as much force into the ground as quick as we can. Alright, so make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this video. Please share it with anyone you know that really wants to work on their velocity training, because a lot of people out there really can't jump or sprint and they need help, as much help as they can. So definitely like, share, subscribe. do whatever else you can with it, get it out there, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.